Well, you know what? Every time that me and Michael get this opportunity to record, we're always thinking about, how to be innovative and how to, keep up with the Joneses when it comes to YouTube and this new technology space that everybody's in. But boy, do you know how hard it is to get yourself prepared for something like that. I mean, me and Michael have literally spent a portion of the day going through like 5 or 6 different types of streaming sites and everything else just to give you an episode. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Nation 80s Comics Podcast. I'm your host, Rodney Stewart, with my co-host and my cousin, Michael. Mike, how's it going?
Doing good, man. Doing good. We started this process at, I don't know, around 8:30. It's 3 hours later, I think. Almost
Yeah.
3 hours later.
Yeah,
Like you
absolutely.
said, we finally got online, so yeah, we're hashing it out here. So I'm good. I'm good.
Absolutely. So now we're trying Zoom, one of the many things out there, what, I wish I had like a 20-year-old kid with me right about now or about someone in high school, and they could probably set this up with all type of ease, because there's really no blueprint that I really see. And we're talking about a live stream space where we have 2 people in 2 different states compared to when you normally live streaming and you have an individual who's sitting in front of their computer on their PlayStation and whatnot. So now we're in the scenario where we're attempting to make this work from a distance. And so far, so good. We're hoping to, of course, upgrade that product and stuff like that. But let's get to our social media stuff right now. So follow us on Nation80 on Twitter and Instagram. And then you can find us on YouTube now under the handle of Nation80. So we're going to be putting content out there. We're definitely going to be hitting it a whole lot more. This is the time and the place to get things popping. And so we're ready to start rocking and making this thing more of a reality. So it's definitely a big deal. So we're going to go off into some news. Mike, I know you had a few news articles you wanted to share. So why don't you kick things off?
Yeah, it's funny you're giving that speech there, and then my camera battery died. So I'm like, oh my god, I gotta put a new battery in it.
Yeah, trust
Oh
me.
my god.
As you were doing that, I was looking at the screen from a view, and I was just like, oh, well, Michael's gone dark. I'll just make some filler time for a few while he gets back and going.
Yeah,
So
so it's still obviously a work in progress. But as Rodney said, there's some things we wanted to talk about for this episode. One of the things that I know, Rodney, you and I have not really been into, not to say that they're bad, but we haven't really been into the CW comic book shows, the DC shows, like Flash and Arrow and Supergirl and whatnot, Legends of Tomorrow. But they've got a pretty, at least to me, a pretty interesting and pretty cool crossover coming up at the end of the year. And that's the Infinite Crisis crossover that they're bringing. And what's very uniquely cool about this is that they're bringing in all types of characters. Black Lightning is coming into the Arrowverse. We've got Brandon Routh resuming his role as Superman in the Arrowverse. We've even got Tom Welling revamping his role as Superman.
yes,
So
Tom Welling.
we've got all kinds of people coming into it, and even our boy from Batman the Animated Series, Kevin Conroy, is gonna be in the Arrowverse crisis event. So I wanted to talk about this real quick because there were a few articles that came out. It did get its first air date, which is going to be in December. They did release a picture of the main protagonist, which looks like it's going to be the Anti-Monitor. Of course, he is from the original Infinite Crisis storyline. And then they unleashed all the characters that are going to be in this 5 episode crossover, which just seems completely massive. So I'm I haven't watched any of these shows for years, but this is something that I'm absolutely psyched about. Even just to seeing Welling or Ralph or Conroy in, just seems completely amazing to see this huge event. What do you think?
You know what? I really see it as being a love letter to everything that we love. That's dealing with DC, and the reason I say that is you have, you know, one of the things that made the Spider-Verse movie entertaining was the fact that they didn't shy away from Spider-Man 3. And it was like, oh yeah, and this happened. And then you see Peter Parker dancing down the street as Spider-Man. And so it's the things that I think that also DC are now understanding. Like, hey, don't shy away that Brandon Routh was, Superman, or Tom Welling was. I necessarily wasn't a Smallville fan, but the amount of people who did love Smallville, this is something, very encouraging for them to see Tom Welling come out to do it. I know there was a little bit of controversy as the gentleman who played Lex Luthor. He wasn't interested. He didn't get any line. He wasn't sure about his lines. They, I think, were being a little funny about the money. Not 100% sure, but he decided to say, you know what, I'm not going to be in there. It's interesting that we didn't hear any information on, was it Krista Kruick or whoever, the Lana or Lena Lane back in the day from Kristen Kruk, I think.
Yeah, Lana Lang. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Lana Lang, and she was in there for, I think, from the beginning to the end, or maybe like borderline to the end, before she did that horrible Street Fighter movie, and then
All right, she was Chun-Li, wasn't she?
yes, she was, and then she used to be a member of that sex cult of Nixum back in the day too.
Oh boy.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so she's and let's be clear, anybody could accidentally join in. Then once you get in there, you realize like, oh, this is not for me. You roll out, which she did, and then the other lady decided to stay. But it's kind of cool to see, some of these other members, come back to Smallville. I mean, well, not to Smallville, but just be back in that DC playground, whatever you would like to call it. So I think that's cool. I'm wondering how they're going to do Kevin Conroy. Is he just going to make a just an appearance, just kind of like a little cameo, or are they going to accidentally go to like an animated Batman world, and then he's going to be playing the animated Batman? So that'd be interesting to see too.
So from what I understand, Kevin Conroy it's going to be live action.
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin Conroy is going to play the older Batman from
the older Bruce Wayne.
Yes. From
Okay.
Batman Beyond
Okay.
is what I understand is what his role is going to be, which may lead to its own solo series for Batman Beyond, which I would totally be down for. And there's already been they've already been teasing bringing Batman into the Arrowverse, or just into the CW, DC shows. But having Kevin Conroy, I mean, you all know Kevin Conroy is the voice of the animated Batman. There's no other Batman that yes, you have your animated movies. I can't even think of his name, Rodney. But you've had Kevin Conroy, you've had another guy play animated Batman, and there's only really one animated Batman. In fact, I know they're actually trying to maybe even recruit Mark Hamill to come into it, but I don't know how that's going to work out, because Mark Hamill has already been in the CW universe as far as DC shows go. He was actually in Flash. He plays one of Flash's
Toy Man.
Yep. So I don't know how that would work. But
Michael, excuse me 1 second. Keep on going. I gotta step out 1 moment. Go for it.
All right. So we have we're gonna have Batman, Kevin Conroy in here, and like I said, I think that's amazing. We're gonna have Brandon Routh in there. He's gonna resume his role as Superman. The interesting thing about this is that Brandon Routh is going to play Superman from Kingdom Come. And this was a very I don't know if it was divisive or what, but this was a very critically acclaimed comic book back in the day. And it was that for this reason. Kevin, or not Kevin, but Brandon Routh's character of Superman was very cynical and older. And he had to deal with the fact that superheroes were being knocked off, and he was having to rally the superheroes to take a position of, hey, we're going to have to start taking out bad guys. And almost kind of like I'm trying to think of the video game now, but what was the video game, Rodney, with where Superman takes over, he kills Joker and
Injustice.
So Brandon Routh is going to play that character. He's going to play that Superman who's very cynical and has a basically bleak outlook on things. Whether this is a carryover from his version of Superman when he was actually playing him on a big screen, I'm not sure. But just to have him in there is awesome. I didn't really care for his version of the movie, but I am very interested to see this. As far as Welling goes, I never finished Smallville myself. I kind of liked it. I think
it had some high points.
It did. I just think it got to a point where, life was going on. I just never finished it. But I always saw Tom Welling as a guy that was a perfect fit to be a Superman, and to have him come back into this thing is kind of cool. And like you said, it seems like this is more of a love letter to past shows, which I think is cool. So I don't know. We'll see how this goes. Like I said, they're bringing in everybody from all the shows. I think it's really cool that they're bringing in Black Lightning. He hasn't been a part of this universe yet, and so having him here in this, hopefully this will we'll see more of that. So
absolutely, I'm hoping for more exposure with him being on the show.
Absolutely, and I think it'll be cool. I think it'll be cool, especially as Arrow, the TV show Arrow, is coming to an end. I would love to see Black Lightning step up and maybe even take over that role or that spot within the CW. So it's exciting news, man. I mean, coming up at the end of the year, it just feels like we didn't really get anything out of the DCU as far as movies go, but it looks like they've been building up to this with all their shows, which actually kind of leads me in to the next topic, the Batwoman TV show. Okay, it just debuted a couple of weeks ago, and from all reports, it's doing pretty well. Okay, as we look at it, it's actually in its first day or in its pilot episode had over 1 million views, and then they rebroadcast it, and it actually did a little over what they did initially for their for the viewership. So I know, I think I saw it on Rotten Tomatoes, something that got a pretty good score. I'm really interested to look at this show because Batwoman is an interesting character. She's kind of a mix of Bruce Wayne and Red Hood, and trying to find that fine balance. It's the first time somebody in the Bat family has actual military training, and how that translates into the civilian world as far as being a costumed hero who was not trained by Batman. So she got trained by herself and by her father. So I think this is going to be an interesting show. I'm actually looking forward to doing this or watching this one. I don't know about you, Rodney, but it actually looks pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I said that I know a lot about Batwoman. I remember reading a few issues during her New 52 run, and then I jumped on to Detective Comics when I believe she's now considered a part of the Outsiders, the Batman and the Outsiders crew.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I can't wait to I'm going to give it a shot like I give anything a shot. I'm at this point now where I like to kind of, binge watch everything at my pace. So I'll be probably waiting for it to come to Netflix, and then I'll, consume that whole series and see what's going on. It's kind of like the same thing I did with Black Lightning, and I used to do it with the other DC shows. And Mike, you mentioned before how we've gone a couple years in terms of watching it. And like you said, it's not really saying anything really horrific about the production, maybe other than Arrow, because I've always heard that Arrow has kind of went off the hinges after the first 3 seasons or whatnot. But, I'm it's just one of those things where like life happens, and eventually I hope to get to it where I'm like, you know what, let me go ahead and check this out. But to have the time to sit down and watch it just hasn't, happened recently. So, but no, I'll be definitely checking Batwoman out eventually. Whatever platform it eventually makes it to.
Yeah, I think it's one of those shows that seems really compelling. You had Arrow, you had Flash and Supergirl. I actually haven't even watched any of the Supergirl show, episodes. Just didn't seem to be something that resonated with me. And then you got the League of Legends.
League of Tomorrow.
Or Legends of Tomorrow. Yeah, Legends of Tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, didn't really seem to resonate with me, which is too bad because I think Constantine's a part of that group.
I think he's guest starred. I don't know if he's like a main character, but I know he's guest starred.
Which is too bad because that was a show, of course, that got brought over to the CW after it got canceled on NBC, I believe.
Yep, it was on NBC.
And I really liked Constantine. So
you know what? If anything, this would be the right time to bring it to the DC universe and put it to that niche crowd.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially since you kind of messed that up by getting rid of Swamp Thing already after 1 season, which I never watched yet either. But Constantine would definitely, I think, do a great resurgence in that type of environment where you have that audience that's been clamoring for it. Maybe even more darker than you could on NBC, because NBC's version was a little too bright for Constantine.
Right, and and I want to say Supergirl was either on NBC or ABC before it finally transitioned over to the CW
CBS.
as well.
It was on CBS.
Was it CBS? Okay, yeah.
First season was on CBS, and then it moved over to CW.
So I'm very excited to see where this is going. I think that the Infinite Crisis is cool. I think that Batwoman is going to be awesome. The chick that plays her, I believe her name's Ruby Rose.
Yes.
The only thing I've ever seen her in was the second John Wick movie, where she played the deaf assassin. And she was pretty badass in that. So
funny enough, she's in your favorite. What's the easiest way to say this? She's in your favorite action movies that make no sense. And the reason I say it that way is because she was in the recent Triple X movie. And
okay.
And you don't go see a Triple X movie for the dialogue, but
no.
But she did a great job in those action scenes. So I think once again, between her and Ronda Rousey right now, they're competing for the same roles for these action movies. If Ruby Rose doesn't get it, then Ronda Rousey's going to get it.
And I can see Ruby doing this. Ruby, at least as far as what I've seen from John Wick, seems like, this is something that she could totally do. Because you want to have somebody that's physical. You want to have somebody that's agile, somebody that has some attitude, and can bring that type of style to the Batwoman persona. I'm actually reading 52, which is literally a weekly series. It was a weekly series back in, I believe, 2006 that came out after Infinite Crisis. And it's 52 issues for the entire year about what happens when there's no Batman, when there's no Superman, where there's no Wonder Woman.
Mm.
and it's everybody else trying to fend off all the bad guys and everything like that. And this is where Batwoman makes her appearance. And I'm gonna go through. I think I'm maybe 5 issues in, and I'm getting ready to come up to where she starts to get introduced to Renee Montoya, and I'm really excited for it. And then, like I think you alluded to, you were talking about Detective Comics. Detective Comics is where they introduced her her origin story, where her father was like this ultra militaristic person, top tier type soldier, and ended up training her after her, I believe her mom and her sister were killed. And she tries to go do the vigilante thing, and then eventually is caught by her father. Her father says, you know what, I'm gonna train you. He trains her, makes the Batwoman suit for her, gives her all the high-tech military upgrades, armor, weapons, what you need to do her mission. And that's how she eventually becomes Batwoman, and eventually goes off to do her adventures. And so I'm interested to see that. I'm interested to see that dynamic. So I think that's a really good casting for Ruby Rose, and I'm really excited to see that show.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna say I got a news article I forgot to bring up, and oddly enough, I don't think we even talked about it this week, but it's kind of important to the game. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige adds Marvel Chief Creative Officer title. He'll oversee all creative and story initiatives. So from my understanding, he is in control of everything. That means comics, that means television, that means movies. So everybody from pretty much from down up to Kevin Feige report to him, and then he will be reporting to Walt Disney's co-chairman and chief creative officer Alan Horn and co-chairman Alan Bergman. And then the decision to place all film, television production, and creative aspects of publishing under Feige comes at an important inflection point for the company. Marvel is moving into a second phase of its superhero film franchise launches after unprecedented record of success in its first decade. So congratulations, number one, to Kevin Feige, because, that man has been really killing it when it comes to these Marvel films. And with that being said, I also give a lot of credit to his staff, because, it's not like this one man has had to curate everything by himself, but the people that he's picked and put into these places. And then, we heard the rumors of, before Brian Michael Bendis left, that they had a Marvel think tank to kind of keep everything together that at one time DC attempted to emulate. So things like that have really, shaped and molded what Marvel has become now. I can always see someone saying I don't like it just because of how Disney's doing things, but we've already kind of seen how Disney is operating now that they've acquired Fox. They've already started the layoffs. They already started trimming the fat to things that they don't need, selling off assets. Hulu's became a whole nother thing now. Disney Plus is getting ready to hit off the ground. And the cool thing about Disney Plus is that they recently mentioned all the movies that they're going to have come out soon. So, Disney is really about to hit the ground running. And Mike, I don't know if you took advantage of it, but I went ahead and bought for $145 the next 3 years of Disney Plus with the ESPN Plus, and I think something else is included in that package. So it's a great start. I would ask you, though, do you think means that Netflix is going to disappear?
No, I don't think Netflix will disappear. I think that there's just going to be Netflix and then Disney. So, whenever those contracts run out for whatever Marvel movies are still on there, and then, of course, their TV shows, whenever those contracts expire, they'll go ahead and finally transition over to Disney. I think that Kevin becoming or getting this promotion, it's not like it's unprecedented. We've seen that with Jeff Johns in DC, not to the greatest extent. I don't think Jeff Johns has the same kind of power that Kevin has because it's Warner Brothers. But you've seen, you see what Jeff Johns has done for DC. If it worked for Jeff Johns, DC would be, they'd be sinking right now. But what Kevin has done, especially on, or really just on the movie side of it with the MCU, is amazing. Now imagine what he can do when he brings that over to straight up the comic book side of it. And what I mean by that is, okay, we had like this 10, 11, 12 year roadmap of basically a Tony Stark story, and how he developed from, just an arrogant rich guy into a guy that, sacrificed his life for the entire planet. It took 10 years to get to that point. And it was great. It was amazing. And we were all very satisfied with it. Now imagine what he did then for the MCU, and he applies that to the comic books. Okay. Marvel has a lot of great assets. Okay. They've got people like, my names are escaping me now, but Johnathan Hickman, okay, who have come out with great stories. Brian Michael Bendis, who will come out with great stories. Jason Aaron, who just finished up with the War of the Realms, come out with great stories. He's not even finished. He's still going. But it's all that stuff that's in between, that kind of gets lost in translation, doesn't make any sense. Okay. When you had Johnathan Hickman's Secret Wars, it was great. Okay. And when everything ended and you had Reed Richards versus Ultimate Universe Reed Richards and Doctor Doom, you thought something cool was going to come out of that. But it really didn't. They just kept the same, everything as status quo. Even though they said, we got all new, all different, Marvel, it really wasn't all new and all different. So you had stories here and there that were very good, but no real direction, really. And so I think Kevin will bring in some direction and have a floor plan. Okay, look, this is what we're going to do. All right. We had War of the Realms, and this is what it leads to. And it's going to lead to this big thing and this big thing. And we're going to have this huge event afterwards. And somehow it'll tie into Johnathan Hickman's, House of X, Powers of X, and all his other new X-Men titles that come out. So I think it's great news for him. I'm happy for him. I can't wait to see what comes out of Marvel now. You and I are still catching up on comics, but the stuff that I'm catching up on has been great. And I hope that they continue to flesh out new characters. Kevin has done a great job of bringing out characters that nobody really was talking about, whether it be the Guardians of the Galaxy or Ant-Man or Doctor Strange. Like, okay, cool, so I think that he'll bring out some more characters. I hope he brings out the champions, and whether it be Miles Morales or Miss Marvel.
Love to see Nova on the big screen.
Yeah, Nova, or even the new Hulk. God, I can't think of his name now. Asian dude. Oh my gosh.
Korean guy. I can't think of his name.
Yeah. I can't think of his name. But anyway, I would like to see all those cats. Riri Williams. I would love to see her more fleshed out. I would love to see Blue Marvel more fleshed out. And I think that Kevin's gonna do some good. I'm excited for it. I'm actually excited for it. So I think that's great. I think that's great for Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other side of it is like, I don't know who to thank for Powers of X and House of X right now. If it's CB Cebulski or Fox for giving the X-Men back or whatever it is. But, one of the things that we were talking about off mic and we were going to talk about on the show is just how they've brought the X-Men back to the forefront, and not only brought them back to the forefront, but they're exciting again. Like before, like I told you before, when they were kind of like that minority, you kind of followed them because they were mutants. But now that you have Inhumans, you got mutants, and you probably got other type of special characters that just pop out of the blue. We weren't really thinking of the X-Men like that. Plus the oversaturation of the X-Men in the 90s and the 2000s. You had well over you had 6 X-Men books. You probably had like 4 Wolverine books. And then you had every other character that had some sort of popularity having their own book out there, that after a while, it just grew boring and so forth. But, House of X and Powers of X is really, and funny enough, brought characters that I never thought I'd be interested in, like Moria McTaggart. Last time I remember her, she had a relationship with Banshee, but I never really followed her along after that. But, that's how things go in this world. So, but, I haven't finished House of X and Powers of X. What about you, Mike?
I haven't finished it either. I'm maybe halfway through. I think that it's interesting because you have House of X, which seems to take place now, and you got Powers of X, which is taking place in the far future.
Yeah.
And you're like seeing the repercussions, and they're intermingling, and you're trying to figure out, man, what happens? What did Moira, Professor X, and Magneto do to have this future? Okay. And they bring in people like Mr. Sinister in there, and
Weird of all things.
It is, but it makes sense. It makes sense because he's always been like, so Moira McTaggart was an expert on mutants and the mutant gene originally. Like if you go read Chris Claremont's stuff, she didn't have any powers. That's a change. That's a change that Hickman put in there. Okay, she didn't have powers before. She was just an expert on mutants. Okay, she didn't have powers. But Hickman retconned it and said, well, actually, she does have powers. And she basically is doing like a Groundhog Day where she just relives. She can't die. She reincarnates. Mm-hmm. And she keeps learning and learning and learning from her deaths. However, I believe there's a point in one of the issues where somebody tells her, I can't remember if it's Mystique or not, or maybe it wasn't Mystique, but it was one of her companions, says, okay, if you die X amount of times, you won't come back. So it's a really good story so far. House of X, Power of X, just a great start so far for Johnathan Hickman in the X-Men mythology. Honestly, it's refreshing because as we were talking off camera, there's just so much that he's done in so little. Whether it's been changing origin stories or showing present and then future and consequences, and the analogy I made was that it's like watching geez, I can't remember the movie now. It's like watching a Christopher Nolan movie where, like Inception, where you watch it, you're like, man, that was good, that was awesome. But now I feel like I have to watch it again to see what I just missed. And that's what I feel like with this. Like I'm reading through this, I'm like, whew, this is awesome. This is awesome. This is awesome. But I feel like I'm gonna have to read it through it again just to, okay, what did I just miss? Because there's a lot. And of course, it's a Johnathan Hickman story. You have said it multiple times, Rodney, where it's something that it's very wordy, and you have to go and read through it again because he paints a narrative, and he plays the long con when it comes to his stories. and then it sets it up to the very end where you're like, oh, word, I got what you were doing, and it's very satisfying. So I'm loving House of X, Power of X right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know what? I think I'm looking forward to when we can finally have consumed all of it and we can uh, do basically our, not necessarily our review, but we can have a bigger discussion about it. But it's definitely made me think more about some characters that I never thought about in the past. And for us being given the Avengers and and Spider Family and all these other books previously, the cosmic characters, it's kind of refreshing to go back to the X-Men for me, and maybe even for you too, Michael.
So I think Rodney went on mute there. It's like I can't hear what he said. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
I was like, oh.
Yeah, and I was gonna say I think that was unintentional too. Like I think something crapped out, and then I lost everything. But we're back, baby. But no, so I don't know where I left off, but we'll basically say it like this. I think it's refreshing to go back to the X family. There's someone who I hold dear to my heart when it comes to comics. Magneto's been one of my favorite characters for years. Cyclops, he's been what I don't know why I'm saying it that way. X Factor has been one of my favorite books for a very long time. Cyclops holds a dear meeting. Bishop and a few others, and you know, I know the whole lineup has changed since then. But you know, when I came up, it was Generation X. It was Bishop. It was a big deal. The X-Men had just broken into the blue and the gold team, and you know, Jim Lee was on those books. Silvestri was on those books. The Kubert, uh, one of the Kubert brothers was on those books, and it was just an exciting time. And I don't know, I haven't had the anticipation for an X-Men book in a very long time, but here we are now, 2019, and that excitement has came back. And I totally thought it was gone. I thought it would never reach that pinnacle again, but that's what happened. We have phenomenal artists like Pepe Larraz, and I can't recall who drew the other books, so excuse me. We'll definitely make sure to talk about them later. And then you have a phenomenal writer, Johnathan Hickmans.
So what do you suppose was the main reason why you kind of fell off of X-Men? You know, like for me, I don't know if I was ever really read X-Men. You know, like of course we watched the animated series growing up, and it was amazing. Like if you were to compare all the animated series of all the comic book shows that have been in existence, you've got X-Men the animated series, as I'm hitting my mic, X-Men the animated series, and then you've got Batman the animated series. And it's like neck and neck. It's like, all right, well, what kind of mood am I in? Am I in a Marvel mood or am I in a DC mood? As for which is the best. You know, there've been plenty of shows that have come out. I mean, there's been Justice League and all those other type of shows, you know, Young Justice, but you know, Superman, the Spider-Man TV show. But it was really X-Men and Batman, the animated series. And so even though I watched those shows, even though I watched X-Men and fell in love with X-Men, I just couldn't bring myself to really read them, only because I didn't know where to start. Because at that time, there was so much out. You know, you were talking about X Factor and Blue and Gold and X Force, and there's just so many titles that, you know, especially after Claremont left, there's just so many titles that came out, and I didn't know where to start personally. You know, we didn't have, you know, of course, you know, with the internet now, you know, shout out to Comic Book Herald, who has these very extensive lists and reading guides of where to start and how to start with certain groups or characters within each comic book company. You just didn't have that back then. So I didn't know where to start. There was so many, you know, I didn't know which character to latch onto. And so I just didn't have that need to want to read uh the X-Men stories. What was it for you? Was it the same? Was it something else that kind of made you fall off of the X-Men for a little bit, or what was it, Roddy?
So at the beginning, like you just mentioned, like for example, X-Force was a big deal for me. This was like right after Liefeld had just left, and we had Greg Capullo and Fabian Nicieza, I believe, or Nicieza. I know I'm butchering his name. Excuse me. Then we had X Factor, where we had Larry Stroman, and man, for some reason the writer escapes me now, but those were two pinnacle books for me. And those books went through a lot of different changes as far as artists and story and stuff like that. And the X-Men books were so popular that they was always sold out, or I couldn't get my hands on every issue of them. So while I loved the X-Men books as a whole, it was some of the X-Family books that were big. The reason I kind of got out of it was kind of like you said, Wolverine is not my favorite character by any stretch of the imagination. And do I enjoy him in some books? Yes, absolutely. When he lost his adamantium, to me that was kind of super cool to see something different. When he broke his claws, that was cool to see as well, and see if they would ever regrow back and things like that. But I feel like Wolverine has been so oversaturated that they've ran out of ideas of what to do with him. And so he was one of the reasons why I kind of got the X books. After that, it was just these massive storylines where they wanted, I don't know if you remember back in the day, but if you ever went to like a mailing company that would mail you comic books, like I think there was East Coast Comics and a few others that were in the back of comic books, they wanted you to read all 9 titles just to get the whole storyline twice. And I just couldn't do it. You know, I didn't have that type of funding at home where I could go in and purchase those type of books.
Right.
So for me, it was more the fact that the X-Men and the X family all around them were just becoming expensive. I mean, that's probably the easiest way to say it. And then I kind of grew up at the same time. So, you know, I got out of comic books at around 18, 19, maybe buying an issue here and there. And then I didn't jump back in it again until my 30s. So I think that played a part as well, that after a while, it just was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and pass on this. And then now I'm kind of trying to catch up with some of that stuff. Some of that stuff I'll probably never read just because it wasn't that inviting. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand when it comes to the X-Men books.
So just to kind of give you, our viewers, an idea of how many different series there were. Okay, we've got Uncanny X-Men, X-Men Legacy, X-Force, X-Men Forever, Astonishing X-Men, New X-Men, X Factor, Ultimate X-Men, Wolverine Weapon X, X-23 Target X. You know, like there's so many, man. Like
we haven't even talked about Deadpool, and Deadpool is another reason. I mean, that was like, he had like 4 books at one time himself, like miniseries.
X-Men Die by the Sword, Uncanny X-Force. Like, it's just so many. So many, and like you said, for Wolverine too. I will say though, for Wolverine, I actually started to read a ton of, I don't know if you've read the Old Man Logan stories, but they're good. They're really good. Like,
well, so I don't deny that he has some good storylines. You know what? Here's my other thing, right? I always kind of envision Wolverine like I envision the Joker. And when I say that, I always loved that his origin was a mystery. So when they finally tied an origin to him, I kind of lost my love for that character. I love that mysteriousness of him, that we never were given a solid origin on him previously. We just knew that he woke up from Weapons X, and, you know, we heard his name was Logan. We heard his name was Patch. Somehow he ended up in Canada with Alpha Flight. Now he's over here, Sabretooth, Omega Red. All of these other guys were playing their little different roles. And that's what kind of made it cool, was that I was hoping that we would never get his origin. And to me, it fit his mold, because remember, Wolverine was slightly a ninja at one time, and then he's a Canuck at other times. And you're just like, how does this all fit in? And then remember, Kitty Pryde was his sidekick to an extent. then Jubilee takes her place, and you're it just you almost enjoyed that type of Wolverine because he just was ultra violent. He ran his own course and all the other stuff. Then they tried to turn him into a teacher who's going to teach the young kids, and then you have I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but then you had Storm who's trying to play almost the Jean Grey role in the relationship that him and Wolverine had at one time and in a few issues, a few years back. So all those things that they've done with Wolverine, and don't get it twisted. You have to adapt, you have to change because you're still aiming for the kids. You're not really aiming for me. You're trying to keep this thing going. But all those changes were more for me to go, okay, well, I'm not looking at Wolverine anymore, but oh, hold up. Cyclops got this new suit with this X instead of the old school visor. Well, let me see what he's talking about. Oh, now he's playing a rebel leader and all this other stuff. That was an intriguing thing. Until then, they came back with the all-new X-Men and brought the old X-Men from the past, brought them to the future. And then you could tell right there and then that there was like writer's block. Like, okay, what do we do now? That we have the old X-Men with the young X-Men with the old X-Men. And
yeah,
you kind of just wrote yourself into the dead end right there.
Yeah, well, and like you said, so it's interesting that you brought up the whole you didn't know what Wolverine's history was for so long, especially during the Chris Claremont run. You didn't know. No one knew. Every now and then they might throw in a little bit of this or that for Wolverine, but you really didn't know what his thing was. So for me, and I can't. Well, I'll post it later this week on the story. But there's a storyline where one writer does basically consolidate everything into what his true origin is, and it's something I haven't read completely, but I want to because it looks really interesting, especially because Bucky Barnes is involved with it. So it looks really interesting. But I get what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying. I feel like a lot of people are coming from where you're coming from, because that's all I read when I'm looking online or I'm looking on YouTube. So I think that you have Chris Claremont. I think that you have Grant Morrison, who had a very important run, I believe, in X-Men. And now you have Johnathan Hickman. But between those, you just had a mess. A complete mess. Where you didn't know what was going on. I will tell you, so Brian Michael Bendis and then Mark Miller, who are the ones that have written Wolverine, Old Man Logan. And what's cool about Old Man Logan is that it's almost kind of, the original one was almost kind of like a what if. And it talked about what happens when the good guy or the good guys lose. What happens when the bad guys win. And man, it was a deep and very violent series. And it's a series where Logan and they kind of drew, from the movie, or the movie drew from the comic book, where Logan kills the X-Men. He straight up kills the X-Men. Okay, you had Mysterio trick Logan, and he kills Jubilee. It was so sad. I'm like, Jubilee's like, but why? I thought we was tight, And
I don't know if you remember, but they expounded on that a bit during the Secret Wars when did the old Liam Logan books. And
well, the tie-ins for that were just amazing. And it was just his journey through that. And they after Secret Wars, they bring him into the main Marvel universe, and it's such a great, Wolverine to me right now as Old Man Logan. I should say Wolverine. Old Man Logan, I love. Wolverine, I can get two shits about. But Old Man Logan, his story is just, it's awesome because uh, he in his universe he kills the X-Men. All right, eventually he kills the Red Skull, but his family dies, and he kills the Hulk and his family, except for a baby that he raises on his own, who eventually leaves him because, you know, Logan had to tell the truth, whatever. Um, and so now he's back in the Earth 619 universe, and he's trying to, he don't even know if it's real or not. He's trying to make sure that that future doesn't happen in this universe. So that to me is really intriguing. The whole Scott Summers Cyclops thing, you know, going from being that Boy Scout. I've never liked Cyclops, but going from being that Boy Scout to being basically Magneto has been crazy. So he went from being a Boy Scout to basically being Magneto. So he went off the rails, became a bad guy. He dies during the Terrigen Mist incident, and then right before the whole X-Men versus Inhumans thing. And then a bit, basically, of course, he comes back. I believe Beast brings him back from the past, or a younger version of him back from the past, and now he's a good guy again. I haven't really read into it, but like you said, X-Men is just, X-Men is a soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
It is a straight soap opera, and depending on who's writing it, it could be really good, or it could be really bad.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, remember when you were growing up and they had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic strip in the newspaper? I don't know if you ever read it back in the day. I used to look at the newspaper, skip the sports, business, in the news section, and go straight to the comic section. And every week I would go and see the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic strip. And if you remember the comic strip, you knew that they never were on basically Earth long enough to do anything, because the adventures that they went on just continued on over and over and over. Like they would get finished with one storyline, and next, they're stuck in it. It just always was a be continued. And I think Spider-Man, the comic strip, did the same thing, but I never read. I think they had it in where you were in Illinois, Mike, but I don't think they had it in the Indiana paper. So we never got that comic strip. But the reason I say that is it's kind of the way I look at the X-Men. The X-Men just has so much stuff going on that after a while you're like, geez, man, like it become, and that was the other thing. As you got older, those redeeming qualities, like you said, what you said about Cyclops, no one liked Cyclops back in the day. It wasn't until that he kind of changed his persona that he became exciting.
Right.
I used to love Havoc and Polaris more because there was just so much more going on with them and their relationship to me than Jean Grey and Cyclops. But, that's neither here or there. And so now you have these other heroes, like you have Kamala Khan, you have Miles Morales, you have Nova. I can't think of the kid who is the alias of Nova. But all of them have some redeeming qualities because we got to find out some more deeper things about them as they go on to be a superhero. There's so much that we don't get me wrong, we know some things about it, but it's so out of our scope. Like let's think about this. Scott Summers and his brother were in a burning airplane, got pushed out, and then they somehow miraculously survived. Their father apparently died, but no, he's a starjammer. He's out in space being a swashbuckler. And now you have Havoc and Cyclops to be. Whose life is like that? Nobody's.
Right. Well, and then he also had Vulcan.
There you go.
Vulcan, who was, so like you said, his father went off to be a space pilot, whatever, and had this kid out in space, Vulcan, who came back, who is seemingly more powerful than any of the Summers brothers.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where he could block Cyclops's, optic beams from another dimension, because he was just that powerful. So yeah, who has that kind of life? Who
Yeah. Yeah, no one can really identify with Cyclops. That's why he's a walking punching bag in terms of just joking on him. Compared to now, you have these characters, and those are only a handful. There's way more characters now that you can kind of. Robbie Reyes is another one where you can relate to them to some extent, and then kind of work through it. Where others you have. And let's be clear, it's not anything detriment to this. It's just the fact it was the sign of the times. You have this extraordinary story of how they got their powers, how they became a superhero, that now, like, you kind of go, how do I relate to that person? What makes this kind of funny, though, is how people still relate to Bruce Wayne, even though they know good and well no one has had that type of origin story in real life. In most cases, I hate to say it, unfortunately, of course, I'm sure someone has lost their parents to horrific circumstance. But what I'm saying is, it's still, he had, shark repellent in his belt. You would go, okay, come on, what are we doing here? But it's Batman, so you got used to it. Whereas we don't give many other people a pass like that. I think only Spider-Man gets a pass like that. Where
Right.
if Spider-Man is driving a a spider car or mobile down the street, we go, it's Spider-Man. It's all good. But if Wolverine comes out with a Wolvie car, we're like, nope, nope, no. That's not how I like my Wolverine. So, it's that type of thing. But, neither here or there. We will eventually talk more about the X-Men because we can go on and on and on about this. But let's move forward and let's talk a little bit about, Mike, what book did you still want to go into the Marvel realm? Did you have a book that you want to bring to the forefront?
So we talked about X-Men, but we can go more into future episodes about that. What I would like to talk about real quick, at least as far as Marvel, and as far as books, I had mentioned Jason Aaron earlier, and you've got Johnathan Hickman. Everybody knows who he is. You've got Brian Michael Bendis. Everybody knows who he is. All right. You got people like Mark Waid and Grant Morrison. These are all just great writers. Jason Aaron is a beast. All right. This guy is just, I've never read Thor before. Never had any inkling of reading Thor. Amadeus Cho, by the way, is the Asian dude I was thinking.
Bam! There you go. There you go. There you
go. But I've never had any inkling of reading Thor, and I started reading Jason Aaron's run, and it was amazing. It's still amazing. I haven't even finished it. Everything from when Jason Aaron took over to when he fought the God Butcher, to Jane Foster, to Unworthy Thor, leading into War of the Realms. It's just, it's amazing. So I guess if anything, I'll make this a recommendation. Jason Aaron's Thor, which is pretty significant because when we looked at the MCU list of movies coming out in the future, one of them is going to be called Thor: Love and Thunder, and it's going to have Natalie Portman reprise her role as Jane Foster, and Jane Foster is going to play Thor, and it's going to be awesome. I remember, I think it was 2012 when we started getting back into reading these comics and whatnot. One of the first things I got was Thor, because it was a female, and I was like, all right, this is interesting, and this was during a time when Marvel was trying to shake things up. Okay, you had Jane Foster as Thor. You had Iron Patriot, who had his own series. You had Falcon, who become Captain America, and these were all very divisive things at the time, because people were either didn't like the change or were just ignorant about it, and nobody, you had to have people who liked it or who didn't like it, and they were very, very passionate about it. So when these came out, when the Jane Foster Thor came out, I was like, oh my God, all right, well, we'll check this out, see what it's about. And started reading it, and found out it was Jane Foster, and I was like, oh my gosh. And it was awesome. It was an amazing story. And I wonder if the people who didn't enjoy it back then, as my battery goes out, I wonder if the people who didn't enjoy it back then actually enjoy it now, because of how well that story was written. It was just a great story, and I think that the MCU is going to do it right, and I think that they're going to have a pretty damn good movie. I'm actually like really excited for this, so I'll put that one in here. There we go. So I think as far as Marvel, I mean, that's what I've been reading, and that's what I am really looking forward to seeing in the movie theaters and to continue reading. I haven't gotten to War of the Realms yet, but I'm close. I'm very close.
All right, I respect that. So if we're going to do recommendations, I'm going to recommend All New Wolverine. This came out in 2015. At the time, I think I was just either coming back to the States after working overseas for quite some time. And, I was still getting into comics in and out, and I didn't know that Wolverine had a supposed daughter and a son. And then I learned about X-23. And then when I was reading All New X-Men, I was wondering if I was going to be reading a Wolverine light or a Wolverine girl type book. But all I can say is that I got I had more excitement reading that book than I thought I would have. And I got to finish it up for the first 5 issues, but I was reading so much at the time, I didn't get to continue. But I do intend to eventually catch up and read the whole series. But I love this book for a lot of reasons. And more of it out of anything was just the fact of that you saw X-23 just become her own. And then that, she was keeping the moniker of Wolverine, because I believe after this time, this is when Wolverine has supposedly died being melted under adamantium. And, we see how that's lasted. But the thing is that this book just gave me so much more character about X-23. It almost reminds me of the Logan series. Welcome back, Mike. Welcome back. And so I think it reminded me a lot about the Logan movies, and because of just how she operated in this, and kind of the same thing where she found out that other clones like herself were all being killed. Excuse me, not being killed, but they were dying because of the fact that they were clones. And so they're trying to find a cure for themselves and others. And then after that, all type of action ensues. I wish I could say I could remember this word for word, but I don't at the moment. But it's definitely one of those things where we got to see X-23 in a different light. And instead of and to me, I felt like from under the shadows or whatever you want to call it of Wolverine. So it was super exciting to see that. And I think also at the time, she was also joining the X-Men. I think she was either a part of the new X-Men or like the Uncanny X-Men at that time. But if there was a book that I would recommend, it would definitely be that one from Marvel at the moment. I would say I'm definitely going to read it again. I will hope that you all would check it out.
Yeah, no doubt. X-23 is a very interesting story. She obviously had been made from Wolverine's DNA, raised very differently. However, she got the kill scent that she could not control once she smelled it, and it was very kind of sad, her origin story. So, but she's had a great development progression in her character, and she hasn't been somebody I've read, but I would totally love to read her.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and end this episode today. Thank you for joining us for the Nation 80s Comics Podcast / we got an episode out there that we can't wait to bring to YouTube, and we're super excited about that. We're hoping to work on our production a whole lot more when it comes to the next episode. This is something that we've been struggling to get going, and I know we've been promising this, I think, since summer, maybe even a few other things. But we're here. We're going to be here for a while. We're going to make sure we're on a continued schedule. We're also going to try to work a way to pull the audio from this. So for those who still listen to us on actual, your podcast of choice, your podcast app of choice, you'll still be able to find us there. But thanks for joining us. Check out our social media. Once again, that's Nation80. You can find us at Nation80 on Instagram and Twitter, and Nation80 on YouTube. And we'll see you for the next one.